Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to speak at this forum. This is my first time here. Might even be the first time that DfT has come and spoken to you about cybersecurity. To introduce myself, my name is Isobel Townsley. I am the head of cyber for the Department for Transport, covering the transport sector. And adding that bit on at the end will become clear why in a moment. Let's see if I can make this work. No? Which button do I press? It's not working. It's a cybersecurity presentation. The IT was never going to go quite right. I think you've got it. Fab. My team here on the side is going to press buttons for me. So I'm going to cover three broad areas today. This is very much a bit of an introductory talk to give you a bit of insight into what work I do, the work my team does, and some of the challenges I think the transport sector in particular and broader sectors are facing regarding cybersecurity. So I'm going to cover very briefly cyber as a threat to transport, how DfT approaches it. So how are we set up, who is doing what inside the department, and as I said, the challenges I think that we are all facing both in transport sector, private sector, public sector around cybersecurity. As I said, it's going to be quite high level, quite a bit of an overview. I am around at lunchtime if anyone has any questions, and if there are particular areas that you'd like to know more detail about in the future, very happy to come back in different fora and talk about it. So I'm not going to go through these in any detail, but these give you a bit of an example of the broader threat from cyber in the transport sector. Quite a good majority of them are UK-based, some are abroad, but really does highlight the fact that transport is seen as a target for cybersecurity actors. The threat is real. It's happening on a daily basis, and depending on where you sit in your organisations, you might well be seeing that, and it takes many forms. And of course, at the moment, cybersecurity and cyber attacks are very much in the minds of the public, particularly with the attacks on retail, Marks and Spencer's, Co-op, and Harrods that are ongoing at the moment. So just a bit of a summary then of the types of threat actors, their methods that the transport sector and others are facing. So motivations and methodologies vary across a range of threat actors. So we've got state actors at the top, and their motivations: gathering intelligence, disruption, gathering data, undermining geopolitical rivals, tend to be very high skilled, and may even use proxies. Criminal actors, very, very also big problem. These are people who are in it for financial gain of some sort. Terrorists, what we call script kiddies. So these are your typical hoodie teenager, quite often sitting in their bedrooms or basements or wherever they happen to be. They're bored, they've got the IT skills, and they want to do something with them. And quite often that is targeting, very opportunistically, targeting a range of sectors, including transport, to see what they can do. Hacktivists promoting political, social, ideological causes. So they are doing it less about who they're targeting, but because they just want to make a point about something that they have a particular issue with. And then increasingly, the insider threat. We saw this a bit last year with the attack on the signage boards at Network Rail, at some of their stations. That was effectively an insider attack. Someone with a grievance used their access to their company, who was contracted to provide that signage to stations, used their legitimate access to try and post messages. Luckily, it was brought down quite quickly, but of course did have an impact on the public. So good cybersecurity can mitigate both the opportunistic, so people will look for an in any in. They might not be bothered that it's transport. They might not be bothered that it's your organization, but somehow they've got hold of credentials, somehow they've got hold of information, and all of a sudden that makes you an easy target. And then there are the targeted attacks. So these are people who have a particular gripe against a company, against a sector. They're doing it because they want to make a point, and they spend an awful lot of time and effort finding that way in. And then once they do, they will exploit it. And we see a really heady mix of the two across the board. It remains to be seen whether the attacks that we're seeing on retail, for example, at the moment, are a result of people finding an in and going, great, I can now exploit these particular victims, never mind the fact that they're in the retail sector, or whether that was a targeted attack against the retail sector for some other reason. As I said, I don't know, I'm not hiding anything from you, but it will be interesting to see. So how does DfT approach this? So I'm going to cover this quite quickly. Cyber and DfT is sort of looked at in three pockets. We have our DfT, Digital Information Services team. Thank you. They are responsible for the cybersecurity of DfT as a government department. So they are part of a cadre across government that looks after government security. They also look after the cybersecurity and are concerned about cybersecurity of some of DfT's arm's length bodies. And DfT is a little bit unique across government in the fact that we have an awful lot. So we have our national highways, we have our network rails, we have our Transport for Londons, and very, very soon we're about to have Great British Rail, which is going to bring a whole host of new cybersecurity challenges into play. So as I said, they are very much responsible on that side, and they will assure their cybersecurity through schemes like GovAssure. In the middle, you have my team. So NSD stands for National Security Division. So I sit in the National Security Division, and I cover the whole of cyber security for the transport sector. So I am interested in the cyber security of the four modes of transport: road, rail, maritime, and aviation. My team acts as a central cyber team in DfT, so heavy focus on policy. So we get heavily engaging with central government policy around cybersecurity, but my team also acts as a regulator, and we're going to come into that in a bit more detail. And we regulate by enforcing the Network of Information Systems Regulations 2018. We do that for road, rail, and maritime. We're a competent authority, even though we sit in the government department. For aviation, we're a co-competent authority with the Civil Aviation Authority. So they enforce the regulations for aviation, and we work very closely with them. Finally, we have our DfT, what I call modal resilience teams. And this is sort of a sort of broad cover term that I'm using to cover everyone else who works in DfT. Some of the modes, so aviation, will have a small amount of cyber resource, and by small, I mean very, very small, as will rail, maritime, and road. And we will work with them to, if there are particular issues that are affecting that mode only, and we will work with them to deliver guidance, changes in broader policy in their areas that might have an impact on cybersecurity. And then there are the larger teams, which I think you heard from yesterday, connected vehicles, who are increasingly having to think about cybersecurity from the very word go around data security and how we keep connected vehicles and connected systems safe. So my team will be involved in that, and we will support the border department as we need to. The strands don't work in silence. We are continually interacting with each other on that basis. Oh, I can click a button now, can't I? So just a little bit about my team then, and to give you some of an insight into some of the things we do. So my team really has sort of 5 core functions supporting DfT's cybersecurity efforts for transport. I have a program section, and this is very much about doing research and working with external bodies to understand the threat and vulnerabilities from cyber to transport. Some of this is horizon scanning, so it's both looking at how the threat might change in the future. It's also about technology. So the technology that you are employing in your systems or that you are working with your customers on, what are the cybersecurity implications for how that technology is used and the systems it can access in the future. So very much that sort of slightly future-looking piece. I have a small team who works on threat and risk. So this is much more the imminent, what is happening today, what are the cyber methodologies being used, how does that affect the risk? So the risk not only that DfT holds as the lead government department for transport, but the risk that our operators hold, and helping them to understand that. And increasingly, that is also looking at emerging tech. So things like AI, which is a mighty force for good, and we are seeing increasingly across our transport systems. But there are also downsides to AI in that bad people sometimes use our AI for malicious purposes. How do we cope with that? How do we mitigate that? And increasingly, what happens if AI in your systems starts to become the target? How do we then protect those AI systems? So a bucket of work in that. Regulatory policy, so working very closely across government at the moment on new cybersecurity legislation. And hopefully many of you will have seen the public statement issued on the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill, which we hope to be laid in Parliament this year, that will expand the scope of current cybersecurity legislation. I have a small team on exercising and incident management. So this is about making sure that when there is an attack on the transport sector, DfT and all the teams in DfT can respond. We have an exercising program, so that's both DfT practicing that its processes and procedures, but also bringing in our operators across the transport sector. So if one of our key operators is attacked, are they comfortable? They know what they're doing with their cybersecurity response plans. How do they dock into DfT? How does the DfT response work and support alongside them? And increasingly pushing into industry comms as well, both in a crisis, but also more on a general alerting basis. And then finally, regulatory compliance. So I'm going to touch on this a bit more, and then I'm going to move on to the sort of challenges I think we face. Oh, I've broken it now. There we go. So cyber compliance, I'm not going to cover this in a great amount of detail. Some of you will be familiar with the Network of and Information Systems Regulations, or NIS, as it tends to get called. But for those who might not be quite so familiar, the sort of two-bit tour is that it designates operators of essential services in our critical national infrastructure, of which transport is one of the UK's C&I sectors. It applies thresholds for who get regulated under those regulations. And it applies those thresholds based on the impact in terms of transport of passengers and freight if a cyber attack occurs and systems go down. So based on your passenger throughput, for example, will determine if a particular UK airport is covered by NIS. If it's not, it will get captured under the broader CAA legislation. So as I said, it is impact-based, doesn't really focus on how the impact is caused, apart from the fact that it will be affecting cyber systems. So it could be a malicious attack, it could be non-malicious cyber. So think CrowdStrike, faulty patch, or it could be non-cyber, interestingly enough. And the example I always used to give was squirrels eating wires in signal boxes on motorways and bringing down signaling systems. My new favorite is fires in substations that shut down whole airports. What my team does, very, very quickly, we are the competent authority for road, rail, maritime, and co-competent authority for aviation. We assess OES compliance, so we choose who gets designated, and then we assess how well they are doing to comply with the regulations. We provide clear guidance to our operators of essential services on what they need to do, and we ensure processes are in place so that if they do suffer an incident that breaches what we call the NIS reporting threshold, so the impact has been above a certain amount of the system has been brought down, that they report it to us. And just there are some of the figures. We have around 56 operators of essential services, excluding aviation, across road, rail and maritime, but we actually assess over 250 plus critical systems across those operators, and many of them are done on an individual basis. So quite a big task. Yeah. Yay. Right, so I know I'm speeding through this, very happy to dig into detail at a later date, but I just wanted to finish on this, and I am keeping an eye on time. So I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly. When Darren asked me to come and present at this conference, he said, please, can you talk a little bit about the challenges that you think, that you are facing, that DfT is facing, that you think the sector's facing? I chose 6. There aren't just 6, there are lots. These are in no particular order, but I thought some of these might resonate with those in the room. First big challenge, there's a poor risk understanding amongst operators, amongst companies, amongst sectors in general as to what their cyber risk is. There's a poor risk understanding of how good your systems are, how well they can withstand a cyber attack, how well your staff are trained against clicking on that link that comes into their email box, even understanding what your critical systems are. And this poor risk understanding continues to be a major concern for us and a major area of work. There are various levels of cyber maturity across transport and within each mode. Some do it very, very well, generally because they have a significant business interest in it, and they know that if they don't do it well, their business will suffer. Sometimes it's a little more nebulous, and we run up against that. It will never happen to me, which drives a lot of decision making. There are supply chain vulnerabilities. We increasingly see attacks against the supply chain, particularly in aviation, but across the whole board and in other sectors as well. They are seen as the weak link. You take out a critical supplier and all of a sudden a number of other systems fall down behind it. Continued investment, it's making the case to your boards that you need to keep pumping money into cybersecurity. It's not something you can fix and then forget about. It's something you have to fix and then maintain. And then legacy systems. We all have lots of old stuff. I work in government. Government IT is getting there, but we all have old stuff. A lot of it was put in place long ago. A lot of it is very difficult to retrofit with new cybersecurity measures. And how do we approach that? It might still have 10 years in its lifespan. And then lastly, emerging tech. And Paula is about to throw something at me, so I'm going to finish up on this, but very happy to pick this up. Emerging tech, the increasing use of AI, a force for good, but comes with a whole host of cybersecurity challenges attached to it that we need to consider, we need to think about, and we need to prepare, and increasingly quantum. Everybody thinks that quantum is 5 to 10 years off. Quantum computing probably is 5 to 10 years off, but it is a cliff edge. When it happens, it will happen, and it will happen very quickly. So what we are charting to do and starting to think about is how do we prepare for that journey? What are the steps that we're going to have to take, and how are we going to have to address it? That was all I was going to cover. I think I'm out of time. I'm sorry that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour through, but hopefully food for thought. And as I said, if there is an interest in digging into any of these in a bit more detail at a future one of these or different fora, very happy to come back.